he would have such an interesting kind of philosophical conversation.
I was so excited by the start.
Yeah, but it was just diluted.
And he says, a machete would have been handy for cutting the sloppy shape of my desire through the plants. Like, what a weird sentence.
That is weird. They always want to know how old they are.
Right.
Which is, like, to me, the least interesting thing about that object.
He says to not believe anyone presenting one right answer, and then immediately presents one right answer.
I know.
I would like to see him genuinely investigate this idea of what is lost when things are taken, even for all the best reasons.
Yeah, it's kind of a cool concept, and he missed the mark, I think.
Welcome to Archaeology Books for Fun, digging books that aren't drier than dirt. I'm your host, Tristan Harenstein, and with me as always, my co-host, Barbara Clark.
Hello, everybody.
And today we are doing the last section of Finders Keepers by Craig Childs. So this one's been kind of a roller coaster for Barbara and I. We've probably disagreed the most on this book for any book so far, and we've kind of flip-flopped our opinions on the book a few times, and it's going to be interesting to see how we end up in the book here. So stay tuned.
We may disagree, but we're still friends.
Yes. You can do that, internet. But before we get into that, we have our usual housekeeping to do. If you are enjoying this podcast, please leave us a comment, a review, subscribe, whatever you are up to doing. It gives us some great feedback, and it also helps get the word out. Also, if you are looking to support us a little more financially, there will be a donation link in the description for the episode. So please check that out as well. If you are not able to make a donation, that is perfectly okay, but comments or anything is always very, very helpful to us if you want to help us out in other ways.
We do like reading your comments.
We genuinely do. There's a little celebration every time we get a comment, so yes, please do. I guess we'll do a little recap on how this went just real quick. The book started off, Barbara and I both were alarmed by the introduction for this book. It felt really strange. And then in the first section, I was actually kind of enthused about it, but Barbara, I recall, was not.
Yeah, it wasn't horrible. After reading the whole book now, it definitely wasn't the worst offender, but I just found it a little annoying, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. And so one of the core ideas for this author's book here is that there's something that is lost when things are removed from their location that they were left in. Be that done by people who are looting or by archaeologists, what is lost and what is, and he's exploring that question. And that'll be important for this episode, but that is kind of his core overarching idea for this book, which honestly, compared to some of our other books, at least he has a core idea he's trying to express.
Yeah, I can
some of our books
think
have not had a core idea.
Yeah.
But after that, it kind of flip-flopped a little bit. I got more annoyed and Barbara tolerated it a little better.
I think we just decided that I'm more jaded than you, Tristan.
Could be. Because then the author starts trying to represent the perspectives of looters and collectors and museums and archaeologists. And
like there's a lot of conflicting stuff going on.
Yeah, and he's trying to represent things without his bias, but that isn't really working, and his own words are contradicting themselves sometimes. He'll say a thing and then he'll seem to forget that thing later.
Yeah.
For example, he very early established that archaeologists are not doing the excavations for themselves, but then he constantly goes back to putting archaeologists on ethical equal footing to people who are collecting for their own personal profit or appreciation.
Which is overall one of my biggest critiques of this book, I guess.
So, yeah, so we'll come around to some of that again this episode, but that's, I think, a pretty good quick recap so far.
Agreed.
So let's dive into Chapter 13, which is titled No Place Like Home. And this is kind of, once again, returning to the idea that of the power of place, I think, is kind of his overall concept. He's kind of returning to that idea after being away from it for a while. And this one started, and I thought, maybe we'll kind of recover at the end here. And I don't know that it did, but I think I figured out pretty well where the problem was with the book. I see we both had a comment on the Mayan Sistine Chapel, as he describes it. And I think it bugged me because he presents this situation as though it is like a groundbreaking piece of archaeology. Whereas basically the guy came across a place that had been partially looted and found a mural and didn't dive in and just start digging right away. And that's what was so groundbreaking to this author.
Yeah, and this part really annoyed me because no no self-respecting archaeologist is going to be, we're not run by emotion, essentially. Like, we might find something cool, like a neat mural, but we are going to step back and say, okay, scientifically, how do we proceed?
Right. And it's not to say that we don't have those emotions, but our training helps us kind of navigate that.
Right. We're not run by them. And I feel like the author makes it seem like
this was unusual.
Yeah. Like what does he say? A less farsighted archaeologist might have gone straight for the heart and begun ticking away with a trowel on the spot. Right. Well, no.
And instead, this guy basically said, no, I'm not going to touch it, and then went away for a couple years, got funding, assembled a crew, and then came back and excavated it.
Which is how that works.
That is how it should go, yes.
Yeah.
So, yeah, again, a lot of my critiques in this really kind of highlight a lack of understanding of archaeology throughout this book. And that's one thing that I've kind of come to conclude is like the core issue here.
And I've noticed something, and this just popped into my mind. So sometimes he mentions specific archaeologists by name. Mm-hmm. But then other times, often when we're like, I wonder if that is a real story, he says something like, I was told by an archaeologist, or I met an archaeologist, but never names them.
Yeah. And like we talked about, sometimes is this story true or not isn't necessarily an important question.
If
right?
If it has a reason, or
right, if it's just explaining an idea.
Yeah.
But sometimes some of these stories feel like they are more important if they're real or not.
Yeah.
And that's where we get to have some problems. I noted just a really strange turn of phrase here that I wanted to share. The author is going through the jungle by himself looking for sites like he does. And he says, a machete would have been handy for cutting the sloppy shape of my desire through the plants. Like, what a weird sentence.
That is weird. He does tend to get a little whimsy with the poetic wording. I don't know.
Right.
Sometimes I'm like, what is this? I have to read something several times, or I'm like, what is his point here?
And sometimes it's fine and it adds stuff. Sometimes it really doesn't work, though. Yeah. And that was one of them that just struck me as a really funny sentence.
Yeah. And one thing that struck me with this chapter, and honestly with this entire book, is just the general focus on the things and not understanding what makes an archaeological site a site. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of, like we talked about, a lot of conflicting information about context. I don't know that he really understands what context is, and we can get into it later, but like there's archaeologists understand that by excavating, we're destroying the site. We usually don't excavate an entire site. We sample it. And the reason we take such extensive notes, as we've talked about in other podcast episodes, is because we know we're destroying it. And so he acts like by archaeologists excavating a site, they're not aware that they're destroying the context.
Or that it was a secret.
Yeah.
Like that we don't tell people. Like, no, we know, and it's not a secret.
Like, we're well aware of it and we understand it, and that's why we do it the way that we do it. And that's why we have such an issue with looting, because they don't. So.
Right.
Anywho, I digress.
Yep. I think that covers this chapter pretty well. I did have just a quick note towards the end. He talks about a possible tomb, and there's two ways of finding out. And one of them, he says, is remote sensing. And I'm like, well, he was all angry at remote sensing just a few chapters ago.
That's true. I forgot about that.
He also definitely portrays it as more information than it actually can provide, which is interesting too.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
But yeah, he was all about remote sensing is bad because we're not digging, or at least he was presenting someone else's point of view without any comment on his own.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah. Anyway, that's all I got for that chapter.
Yeah.
So chapter 14 is titled Holding On, and this one features a specific collector, I guess. I guess there's no indication that this person is looting himself.
Right, yeah.
But he is collecting. But with the guy here, I found the collector he's talking to be an extremely unreliable narrator.
Which,
he's telling stories that I don't think are real.
Right, yeah.
He had one story about owning the archaeologists by feeding them food cooked with charcoal excavated from a Mayan site.
Right.
And it just had a everybody clapped tone to it. Like, I don't think this really happened.
Yeah, that was super weird too. And like...
Well, and here's the thing is oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, why? What's the point of, like, where does all this, like, anger, resentment? I don't really know.
Well, he's a collector and we're the enemy.
Yeah, but, like, to cook something on charcoal and then be like, I got you guys. Like, it's just so stupid. Like, why would you even think that up?
Right. Yeah, and here's the thing thing too is, we had unreliable narrators in, for example, Stealing History, but the author would let the person say their thing, and then he would have comments and say, I couldn't verify any of this.
Right.
I don't have any reason to think any of this is real. You're right.
He did good journalism.
He did.
Which he was a journalist. Yeah.
And so I appreciate letting people's perspectives be presented without commentary, but you can, as the author, then you need to comment after, because that's kind of what we're doing here.
Yeah.
I feel like, anyway. So, yeah.
Well, and I was super annoyed by this guy because I've run into this before, but the collector I guess he did possibly dig, actually, because it says that he would purchase land for the express purpose of digging on it to find artifacts.
True, although it's presented as basically he is doing archaeology.
Yeah.
It doesn't, I don't know that you can say that. Like, sure, maybe he's recording and carefully excavating, but unless you are sharing what is learned, unless you have research questions, it's not archaeology.
The guy seems to treat the past like his personal plaything. Like,
yeah.
And
that's presented here as a ethically equal path.
Almost like a virtue.
Yeah. And so the guy, one of the overarching themes here is he has his own way of interacting with the past and finding meaning in the past. But my question comes to be, okay, but for who, right? Because these things are in his home, his private museum, right? Who has access to them? And then they make this whole point, again, maybe it's a little more believable, but he's handed a pipe, right? And the author has this moment with the pipe, and the guy's like, see, you should be able to have that moment. But if the Smithsonian did that with this pipe, it would last a year. Right? So who gets to have that moment? This guy is the only one that gets to decide who has that moment, and that's not okay.
Right. Like you were talking about in our previous episode about gatekeeping.
Yeah. This is a form of gatekeeping.
And a negative form of gatekeeping, too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I guess at one point, the collector leaves the room and leaves him alone, and he looks around and he says that he left me alone in a room crowded with pure gold and silver gewgaws. What is it?
Gewgaws.
I've never heard that word before.
I have.
Okay. I had to look it up, and it just means showy things, which that says all you need to know, right? Referring to artifacts as gewgaw.
Bringing that up, though, now that you bring that up, because we'll see later at the end, very, very end of the book, the author has no patience for looting and collecting. He says anyway. I wonder if calling it gewgaws, I'm not sure now either.
Sorry, I messed you up, didn't I? I got you all confused.
If calling it that word.
Maybe it's a regionalism.
I wonder if that's the author's bias showing through. His disapproval of it.
Okay.
Because it is a belittling thing, right?
Okay, yeah.
Maybe.
I just never heard the word before, so
Yeah.
I've never seen it in any other context or anything, and I was like, what a weird way to say, artifacts.
Because it's just usually pat, meaningless, pretty things. And I wonder if maybe he's using that word intentionally.
I wonder.
I don't know, though.
I don't know. I can't figure out whether or not he would have that kind of in-depth forethought. I don't know.
I'm not sure the author would use that word that carefully.
Right.
Would be my major concern with that conclusion. But based on what he says later, it seems as though it would fit his opinion.
But again, he's also very conflicting. There's
Well, again, some of that is just, I think it is him saying, this is what this person said, and thinking he is removing his bias from the situation. Whereas I don't think he's very successful with that.
Yeah.
I think he's trying to be so unbiased that he's actually working towards a harmful narrative here, which is a common problem in interpretation, too. Do we try to influence people down a path that we think is the right path, or do we try to be neutral and risk accidentally reinforcing something problematic? And this is an ongoing debate that I don't have an easy answer to. But I feel like this is maybe an example of him trying to be neutral and failing at it, the opposite direction of that he should be, maybe. Anyway.
Oh, and another thing I noted, and this will be my last thing for this chapter, but I think it's important to point out given his past. Again, he is given an artifact. And again, he takes it instead of saying no. He's given the little conquistador, the pins from the conquistador that showed up in the back of a pickup truck by some guy. And he's like, oh, can I have these? And he took them. And then this was the looter or collector took them and then ends up giving them to the author as a gift.
Are you sure?
Hold on. Yeah, he says, here, I'll give you one. Before I could figure out whether to say yes or no, he popped it into a small plastic specimen bag and handed it to me. Here you go. Treat it with respect. It's very historical.
Okay.
Have we learned nothing, Tristan?
Right. And this is not like the previous one where this was a poor man potentially investigating his own past. This is a guy looting the past. You can say no.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, you're okay to do that. Like, I can see how the previous one, it'd be hard to say no. Like, we came up with a pretty easy excuse.
Right.
But just saying no would be hard to do.
Right.
Whereas this, you can say no. You know, yeah, that's too bad. I'd missed that part. Okay. All right. So moving on to the final full chapter then, chapter 15, titled Letting Go. And so this chapter was interesting to me because at the beginning of the book, he said he was going to use the word archaeology to just basically mean anything old.
Yeah.
And this is the first chapter where it really bothered me, and it really came to the forefront about why that's actually a really bad idea. Because he's using the archaeology, and it's confusing, because archaeology is a thing, it is a process, it is defined. It does not just mean old things.
Right, yeah.
And using it just to mean old things really confused what he was saying here sometimes. And it is actually, feels kind of dangerous. And I didn't write down where that was, I guess, exactly in this chapter. But for example, in the next one, he talks about a little box of archaeology that he has. We'll get to talking about that, but it's not a box of archaeology. That is a nonsense use of that word, the box of artifacts. Just use the word that exists for that purpose. It's so weird to me.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Also, I think this chapter kind of brought ahead as well a bit of an explanation for why he's been presenting things the way it has been and why I think we sometimes get our hackles up about things. He basically says he's been not trying to present one answer here. And we see this actually previously in the whole situation with the Kiva and the
reporter.
Yeah, and the reporter where he doesn't want to push his ethics onto her. And we're like, you don't have to tell her what to do, but as someone who's put effort and thought into this and written a book, you have an obligation to make sure people are informed of what the consequences are of their actions.
Right, yeah.
And I don't have a lot of patience for neglecting to do that because it feels like it's just taking a safe way out.
It is. And then, what's the point of writing a book about it?
Right. I don't, yeah.
You're really, diluting your potential point by, I don't know. It's very frustrating.
Yeah, and then, again, it's trying to keep his opinion removed from the narrative, but he still makes his opinion clear in the book.
Yeah.
So it's kind of pointless and conflicting and confusing is what ends up being.
Yeah, no, I agree. Also,
in that bit, he says to not believe anyone presenting one right answer and then immediately presents one right answer.
I know.
Yep. It's such a weird, if anyone tells you there is only one right answer to the conundrum of archaeology, using that word incorrectly there, he is trying to tell you something. At this point, considering all that has been removed, it is worth leaving the last pieces where they lie. As for what is already in the ground, by all means, move it around, whether you repatriate it or pass it on to the next collector. I'm not proposing anything radical. Don't go to your nearest museum and cut the glass as I once did, imagining that you can put the world back to the way it once was. That time is over. Let us at least appreciate all that has been gathered, and for the rest, let it lie. And that's just, again, he presents one solution here.
Right.
And I find some of this interesting, the whole bit about don't try and cut the glass to the museum and thinking you can return things back to the way it was. You can't. That's kind of an interesting idea. And there's tidbits in there, but it's all undermined by what we've seen over and over, that he doesn't understand that archaeology is not about the things.
Right. And that's one of my biggest critiques.
And for those who may not have heard us say it before, archaeology is not about the things, it's about the story the things tell. And pretending that archaeologists are just in a race with looters to grab all the things so we can have the things and not them undermines the whole premise of this book, which the premise isn't inherently bad. But if he came to this with a better understanding of archaeology, I think I could be much happier with his book, even with some critiques of it. But because of that, it kind of just undoes the whole thing.
Yeah. There was a story in here where he was going to find a basket that he had come across before, but he wouldn't tell. I guess he told his friend, and his friend told an archaeologist.
He had friends with him when he found it.
Yeah. And the archaeologist asked him to go get a sample of it. But he didn't want to tell the archaeologist where the basket was located. And the archaeologist was apparently okay with that. Like, what kind of archaeologist would be like, yes, please go get me a carbon-14 dating sample, but you don't have to tell me the provenience or the context of this object.
Well, they would, yeah, because it's expensive for one,
And there's
then
no
it's useless.
point. Yeah, it's completely useless if you don't have any other
So what, we've
contextual
got
information.
a potential date. We don't actually know where it came from.
Yeah.
That means nothing.
But it's something I run across with when people like bring artifacts to us. They always want to know how old they are.
Right.
Which is like, to me, the least interesting thing
It really
about
is.
that object. So I feel like that story is just maybe one of those ones that's probably not true or stretched or...
Yeah, some of the other stories that occurred to me, they may not be true, but it didn't matter. Whereas this one, like, this doesn't feel true and this kind of matters.
Yeah.
Because the premise just basically makes it feel untrue.
Yeah, and like I just didn't see the point
No.
of the story or the point of an archaeologist asking for a dating sample on something that they didn't know where it came from. That just doesn't happen. And then there was another one about a retired park ranger who was deciding what sites to report and what sites not to report during surveys he did on a Navajo reservation.
Yep.
And I was like, well, what gives him the authority to make those decisions? Is
Yep.
he consulting with the Navajo?
I feel like that's a decision the Navajo should be making.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel like an archaeologist would understand that.
Yeah. And if the Navajo said, no, we don't want these sites reported,
That's fine. That's cool.
Done and done, right?
Yeah.
We don't, that's it. End of the story. But it's not mentioned here that that's the case.
Yeah. And he's like,
It's presented as an act of rebellion.
yes. And it's an act of cultural insensitivity. It's not ethical.
No.
And like he made some comment. It was this same park ranger made some comment about, I guess he was mad at some BLM archaeologists because they removed an artifact from its context. And he's like, all they did was write a big old report about it, essentially. And I'm like, yeah, in that report was the context and everything you needed to know. And I can understand and maybe empathize a little bit with like the fact that even with that report, it is taken out of its context and
you don't experience the location, what's around it. That's fair, but
I also wonder, like, I want more information. Why did the BLM archaeologists remove it? What was the reasoning behind it? They had to probably consult with the tribe. What did the tribe say? Like, there's so much more that goes into it than they're presenting in this chapter.
Yeah. And at one point, this same guy talks about wanting to do an outdoor museum where things are just left in place and people can go visit and then not disturb it, which sounds great, but it won't happen, right? There's a reason that out of all the stuff that are susceptible to the Sunshine State laws, archaeology sites are not one of them. That basically means public records. Archaeology sites are not accessible to just anyone.
Right.
Because people will loot them.
Yep. The second they identify where they're located, they're going to go out there and take.
Yes.
And for the reasons that are presented in this book that people want to hold and want to touch and want to see and want to discover. That's why museums exist, essentially.
Right. Well, and then it's presented too that these things should be just left to naturally decay in their place, as if that's a new concept. Like, no, that's something we know of too.
Yeah, and
again, I gotta remind myself this is 15 years old,
and it was old back then. It was dated back then.
It was dated back then, but this may be the idea of like leaving stuff to just decay naturally in place. Maybe not that old at that point. I don't know for sure.
Yeah, I don't know. And I know, like, especially here in Florida, I don't know how other tribal entities feel about it, but there are tribes in Florida that's what they prefer. And when we consult with them, that is what we do.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the whole Native American consultation here there's a lack of understanding regarding that.
And here we have a quote regarding the ranger. This Zen approach makes the hoarding of archaeology seem desperate and reckless. I admire Blackburn's fidelity to natural process. Again, he's using archaeology here poorly. He means the past would be a better phrasing, frankly.
Yeah.
Because archaeology is a scientific process. It is not the past in itself. So this is just, also it is really the idea that it's either we hoard archaeology or we leave it in place like this guy wants. Again, he's lumping archaeologists in with the looters. And it's just such a clear example that he doesn't really understand archaeology, because he definitely does not understand that most archaeology is salvage archaeology.
Right.
And actually salvage archaeology, not how he describes it. It is, you have to excavate this or it will be destroyed.
Yes.
This is very, very little archaeology archaeology as in the process is actually done unless that is the case.
Right. Yep.
So the whole problem with museums filling up, the whole hoarding things that people never get to experience and see, those things are not by and large collected to do that. They're collected because they will be destroyed otherwise.
Yep.
And he, again, this undermines his whole point and what he thinks he's making here, unfortunately, because he has some, I would like to see him genuinely investigate this idea of what is lost when things are taken, even for all the best reasons.
Yeah, it's kind of a cool concept,
Yep.
and he missed the mark, I think.
Yep. And it just doesn't work because of this lack of understanding. Okay? So that is the last of the remaining chapters. He has a section titled Coda, which is kind of the conclusion, I would say.
Yeah.
And this is the one where he says he has a little box of archaeology. In this case, it is not stuff he has collected, which I was, got my hackles up a little bit there.
Same.
It is something that, according to him, came down from his father, from his grandfather, his great-grandfather. So it's been passed down like that, so he just inherited it. That's, understandable.
And it happens often.
Yep, and he just reiterates the points of thinking we should leave things in place now. We shouldn't be collecting anything at all anymore.
Yeah.
Also, actually, we talked about this at one point, but archaeologists, even when excavating, don't always collect everything.
Right. We very rarely do.
It depends on the situation, but yeah.
I mean, we have an understanding that this is a sampling process, and one of the reasons that we don't excavate a site in its entirety, in most cases, is because we understand that in the future, there could be different methods that are more accurate, and we want to have something left in situ, but in the ground. And also cost. I feel like it's expensive. Archaeology is not, you don't get into archaeology because there's money in it.
Right.
And that goes for funding for projects as well.
Yep.
One thing I did notice is he talked about a collection that was found in Chicago. I guess a son reported it after his father passed. And it was a collection of things from Italy. And he talks about it like it was a collection that previously did not exist. And then it existed in private hands, and then it existed in the public hands by way of his son who reported it. And I'm like, but it never belonged to either of them ever for any reason. And a collection of jumbled things that don't actually tell a story because they're not related, to me, is not a collection. It's a bunch of stuff.
Well, and once again, he described this man's home, and it was hoarder's scenario.
Yeah.
This was unhealthy stuff, and this person was not well and was destroying archaeological sites in context.
Yeah.
As a result of that.
And this was some of the stuff was documents from the different popes and things.
Yeah.
Stuff that did not definitely belong to him.
They had no business being in America.
Yeah. And he acts like this is some virtuous thing. And I'm like, it's not. It was an issue. His son was burdened with this great collection that he had to then deal with.
Well, and they had a falling out over this.
Yeah. So it's not this feel-good story that he's trying to make it out to be.
It's really weird.
Yeah. It annoyed me. And I think one of the reasons it annoyed me so much is because you and I have seen this over and over again. We've dealt with so many people who are like, I found this in my so-and-so's basement or attic or whatever, and I have no idea what to do with it.
The authors presented this several times now, too.
Yeah.
We've seen it in Stealing History. We've seen it, I don't know if we've seen it in other books we've read yet, but we've seen this situation where the children are burdened with these objects, and that's not okay.
Yep.
And then for the last bit, we have probably our first reading group guide, which was an interesting little thing. I don't think we need to go on too much, but there was a conversation with the author section, which is a little strange.
It's weird because it's like an interview, but we don't know who's interviewing him. So I think he came up with the questions.
He's asking himself questions he can answer, which is a little strange.
Yeah.
But in this conversation, he actually gets very strongly worded about looters. He says, I believe looters are consciously burning history. Looting is a form of historical genocide. And so I think I know why he thinks he didn't want to say this sort of thing previously in the book, but it is now in the book.
Yeah.
So if you didn't want to influence opinions, it shouldn't be here at all. It's just really weird. So at least I'm glad to see that he has a strong opinion on this, as opposed to him secretly trying to push looting as an acceptable thing to be doing. He then has a series of journal entries he's made on his visits to sites, which honestly might be about the most valuable piece of this whole book. I didn't read them in detail, but if people would do this instead of picking things up and moving things around, around, that'd be really cool.
Yeah.
And this sort of thing could be very useful to archaeologists too.
Yeah.
So I thought that was cool for him to include that as an example of how it could be done.
I enjoy discussing like the difference between laws and ethics and why laws exist versus, like compared to ethics and what the differences are and things like that. And so I kind of got hung up in all that. And he talks about how we ultimately choose to relate to it, I guess, the past or archaeology.
Right.
What ethics we agree upon is yet to be decided. And I was like, no, it has been decided. That's why laws exist. Ethics aren't enforceable, but laws are. And we create laws to essentially guide us in a collective ethic, right?
Yeah.
And so I was like, no, you're wrong. But also he made this assumption that if law enforcement presses too hard, like they did in that one case, which resulted, unfortunately, in people taking their own lives, that it will cause what he called an artifact rebellion. And I mean, we definitely don't want that situation. But I think more accurately, what has happened is there has been inconsistency in law enforcement regarding like looting and artifact collection and things like that. And so either by law enforcement not having the time, law enforcement not knowing these laws exist, which we have come across, and there are essentially bigger issues that law enforcement is dealing with.
Or laws being kind of unenforceable.
Yeah. And that's a huge issue too. But because you have to catch them in the act.
Right.
But I would argue that those are the issues that have created this situation we have now.
I would also argue, because he presents the crackdown and then people going underground and now buying helicopters and everything, as that is looting getting stronger. And I would argue the exact opposite. That is actually them getting weaker, because now you can't do this on a nickel and dime.
Right.
You have to own a freaking helicopter.
Yeah, that's true.
If you get caught, you lose that helicopter.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that is not this stuff being drowned out. I think that is actually people trying to get around the laws, but they have to put a lot more effort into that, and that is only a good thing.
And the fact is, the people that are doing this, they know it's illegal.
Right.
They know it's illegal. They're trying to do their best not to get caught. And even if you don't agree with a law, if you get caught breaking it, you have to face those consequences. So if you are going to knowingly break a law, you have to be willing to have your helicopter revoked from you and whatever. And I think one of the issues we're seeing is they're willing to break the law, but they're not necessarily willing to face the consequences. And I'll just say one last thing too, is throughout this book, we've talked about how he doesn't seem to have an understanding of cultural patrimony as far as especially Native American artifacts are concerned and cultural belongings in general. To a certain degree, archaeologists do not get to decide what is done with the artifacts that they remove from the ground. They either, in the case of CRM, they belong to either the federal or state entity on which the artifact exists, or if it's on private property, they do belong to the private landowner. And if they're on Native American property, or they are Native American grave objects or, human remains, they belong to that Native American tribe. And so I think one of the biggest things he does not understand is when collectors take an object, they take it for themselves. Even when archaeologists take an object out of the ground, it never becomes our object.
No.
And he does not seem to understand that.
Yep. So I've got my problems with the book that I wrote out just to kind of define where my issues were. So the author has a very interesting core idea, but it's diluted through issues with the book.
Yeah.
The core idea would be great. The author lacks a deep understanding of archaeology. He thinks it's about the things, and he uses the word for things that aren't archaeology, and that dilutes all this stuff. Contradictions throughout the book are a big problem. He condemns looting, praises archaeology, then he says things to put them on equal footing. Sometimes he acknowledges that the selfish nature of looting and collecting, and sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes he implies that archaeologists are also equally selfish. The author doesn't understand that salvage archaeology must be done or the site will be destroyed, and that this is most of archaeology. Also, the author's call for everyone to leave things in place would be nice, but is not realistic. He even says this at one point, but he doesn't seem to understand that archaeological efforts, as presented, are almost exclusively in response to people looting.
Yeah.
Right? So the archaeology he's presenting that they're doing that he doesn't want archaeologists to do are in response to people doing this looting activity. If the looting activity didn't happen, these things would not have been collected.
Right.
As he's presenting it here. That is, again, that's not actually what archaeology is, but this shows kind of the weaknesses of the book as a whole.
Yeah.
And why it ultimately is undermined.
He would have such an interesting kind of philosophical conversation.
I was so excited by the start.
Yeah, but it was just diluted.
Yeah, if you all remember the first episode, I was very enthusiastic about what we could do with this book. And the idea is still interesting. It just, we never got to the point where we could talk about it because there was just a lack of understanding of it.
It would have been great if he had an archaeologist write with him or even just edit it and provide some.
That was an archaeologist. This could have been fantastic.
Yeah.
So, Barbara, who would you recommend this book to? Would you recommend it to someone who is not an archaeologist?
Absolutely not.
Right. Would you recommend it to a archaeology student?
No. And the reason being is because I guess it would depend on the context in which they're reading it. Like if it was part of a class and there was class discussion like we're having, then maybe. But if it was just for fun reading, I don't think I would.
No, for fun reading, no. I think for a student, it could be very valuable as an exercise into thinking about why these things are problems.
Yeah.
And again, there is still a core idea there that's not bad, just not fully realized. So I think archaeology student, as high as I'd go, I don't know if I'd recommend it for our peers, unless maybe for a similar reason.
I would say the only way I would recommend it to our peers is like kind of, oh my gosh, there are so many issues. You should read this book. I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think most people who are trained and working in the field will have, I guess, to the book's credit a little bit, I had to sometimes think about why I didn't like something, which, as I said, I think in a previous episode, is kind of rare these days because usually we get such tired arguments.
Yeah.
That actually having to sit down and think about why does this phrasing bothers me or something was actually maybe good for me. So maybe there's some merit in that case, but not in the way that it's intended to be. I don't feel like.
Would you recommend this to your parents?
No. I would not recommend it to anyone who wouldn't have a real chance of understanding where the problems were.
Yeah, same. It missed the mark, which is a little disappointing.
Right. But I have full confidence that our next book will not miss the mark.
Yes. I'm excited about our next book, Tristan.
So our next book is what, Barbara?
Luna the Cat, written by our two wonderful colleagues, Mike Thomin and Nicole Grinnan. So excited.
Yes. So this is a chapter book for kids, I'd say. So we're going to do this in maybe an episode, maybe two, maybe include an interview. We'll have to see how it goes.
It's a little bit different for us because it is a kid's book, but it's one of those books. I was talking to Mike about it and he said, that the idea is this is for kids that are just starting to read the longer chapter books.
But it has been on the Amazon bestseller list.
I know. And you have a cat named Luna.
I do. So we will have to make sure that she makes an appearance maybe I'll bring her into the office when we record or something.
Oh my gosh.
That'd be a mess. Full disclosure too, and we'll repeat this when we get to reading the book. The authors are friends of ours. So, take that with a grain of salt. We're not going to be probably super critical of them.
I don't know.
I don't think we're going to need to be.
But it's a Florida-based book. It's about the
settlement attempt of Pensacola.
Yes.
The first one.
Yeah,
we're looking forward to that one, and we'll see you all next time.
All right. Happy reading, everybody.
Archaeology Books for Fun is brought to you by the Florida Public Archaeology Network, a program of the University of West Florida. You can find out more about archaeology and about FPAN at fpan.us. We appreciate any feedback, so if you're listening to us as a podcast, please leave us a review, and if you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Thanks for listening.